Hi, I'm Dave Holmes. I'm Network Engagement Manager out of the Candid's Midwest office. Very happy to bring you into this session, the last session of the day today. It is called Asset Framing, what it is and why is it important. And we are very, very grateful to have with us today two excellent speakers that are coming from the Midwest, though today they're traveling and in different parts of the country. So all around here, we have Damon Hargis. He is a community ambassador with the Indianapolis Foundation. He's also a faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute. And we also have Pamela Ross, the Indianapolis Foundation's Vice President of Community Leadership and Equitable Initiatives. And I am listed as a moderator, but essentially I'm going to turn this over to them and let them tell you about asset framing. We've been talking about it in our proposal writing classes. You may have looked at some of the, if you've taken a proposal writing class from us in the last year, you have been learning about asset framing and how important it is when you're telling your story as a nonprofit. And we thought we would bring in the absolute experts to tell you how that works and why it's important. So Damon and Pamela.
Thank you, Dave. I don't know about absolute experts, but experts, maybe. Hello, everyone. I'm Damon Hargis again. So originally born in South Bend, Indiana. And I live in Indianapolis for the last 24 years and lived in and work in and hang out in low-income neighborhoods. And my title in my neighborhood is the roving listener. And my job is to find the gifts and talents of everybody, of the life in the life of the community, find a place for those gifts and celebrate those gifts in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. And so I work right alongside Pam in a project that she's been leading, that we've been leading together. Pam.
Thanks, Damon. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Pamela Ross. I am, as Dave said, currently the Vice President of Community Leadership, which is our grant-making arm for the Indianapolis Foundation, as well as our community leadership initiatives. And then also equitable initiatives, which would be things such as the work that we do with the ambassadors. We just this past week, or during this week, actually while I'm away, we're launching an anti-racism app that I'd be happy to share more about in the chat. Or you can go to our website called the Movement of 10,000. That's an initiative to bring more people collectively together to create anti-racist behaviors that then lead to actual behaviors within policies and institutions to really create more equity. And then we're a part of a national cohort, which is where Dave, the first Dave Risotto that we met, who recommended us for this session, called NEON, and it's Nexus for Equity and Opportunity Nationwide, and it has a total focus of community foundations coming together to create a collective movement, yet again, across the country, from West to East Coast. 8 community foundations focus on dismantling systemic racism. So my work now has a lot more to it, but I think, Damon, you kind of wanted, well, I'll get more into how we came together and what my role has been prior to this. I just changed into this new position in January, but I've been a vice president for Central Indiana Community Foundation for about 5 years. I've been with the foundation for about 6, and I'm originally from Indianapolis and love hanging out with Damon. He says we work together, but he's my friend and brother. So we hope that we can manage ourselves today. We're not too casual, but it will be semi-casual.
We're watching.
Yeah, we will try to behave. So
luckily we ain't in the same room. So.
Exactly. That would make it even worse. We are some thousands of miles away, so we're good.
Well, awesome. Well, we're here to talk about asset framing, and I would love to just kind of lay it out plain and simple for you. And first, it's really a not just a mind shift, but a body shift from scarcity to abundance, from problem-based solutions to potential-based solutions. So most of the time when people think about advocacy or community organizing, they're thinking it from a frame of we have to fix something. I think when Pam said the right thing when she said, my friend and brother, that is where potential-based solutions asset framing starts at, in a very relational format. It has its roots in asset-based community development, or other people call it ABCD. My friend John McKnight, in the early 80s and the late 70s, watched communities that were healthy. And what he learned from those communities, especially low-income communities, there are communities that look at the glass half full and the people in it as potential rather than problems and needs. So everything starts with the question, what are your gifts? It's also based in what gifts are, is gifts of the hand, head, and heart. These are things we share from your head. The things you know, gifts of the hand, is things you do with your hand that you share. And the things you're passionate enough, gifts of the heart, that you care enough to move you off the couch to do something for the common good. And the key word is sharing. And so some of the basic principles in this is about power and how we share power. And that's basically the thing around the format. The other thing, what's important is this work is very hard, and places where we are funding and utilizing need as the basis of the way we attack problems. So for an example, in my neighborhood where I live before, it is known publicly by a zip code, meaning there are a lot of Black people that live there. There are a lot of people not with deep pockets. So attributed to that is that they don't have a lot. And most people call it a food desert. But me and my neighbors went around and counted how many backyard gardeners and people that grow things, 110 gardeners. So essentially it's been named by need, but what if we shifted the way we thought about stuff as this is a community of people who love food? Another thing we have in a 4-block radius is 45 artists, right? Formerly, it is a place that need to be beautified. And so a couple of things we did is we paid our neighbors to paint their stories on doors. We found 35 doors thrown in the alley. So the mindset is they were going to put money, nonprofits were putting money into a community to be beautified. What asset framing does is say, who do we have here that an artist, and how can we invest in those things? And I think some of the things that Pam has really helped Indianapolis and others to think about is how power is shared. So I'm going to pause there and say, Pam, did you want to add anything into that?
I don't know which part where you want me to go with, because I start talking and not know how to stop talking. So tell me.
Well, I think one of the things that is there anything, and as you see, what is the importance of good institutions using asset framing? Right.
So as foundation, and we were established in 1916. So we're 106 years old, and a lot of the practices that we had were very much centered around, of course, because that's what philanthropy does, look at what the need is. When we changed our mission in 2018 to be focused on creating a more equitable Central Indiana, no matter place, race, or identity. And this was in 2018, where we did go ahead and early on and center the issues of race. You hear that Diamond said, certain zip codes, they have a profile that's attached to them. So not just need, but also who, and what's going on in those neighborhoods, and not being close enough, not being proximate to the issues, as Brian Stevenson talks about. And so as a foundation, we knew we needed to get proximate. We needed to get deeper into understanding who are the people and what is it that they are doing, and how can we come alongside. And that was very hard and continues to be very hard because there's an issue there around trust. And who can go into the neighborhoods and build the trust, and how is that done? So I think that when you do hold spaces of power, it is really important to know that that does not make you an expert, just like it doesn't make us an expert. Like, everybody is learning together in these spaces, especially if there are spaces that have been undiscovered. But power makes a huge difference. Who has the money and who has the power to make different decisions makes a big difference when we're talking about how we recognize assets, because assets typically are centered around those two things, not how people are really using their gifts and talents to share and further more than themselves or the institutions that they hold, but actually uphold their neighborhoods.
Pam, one of the things I was thinking about us talking, and one of the stories for me was that before Pam start leading the ambassadors, I think, and this new mission came up, I think people and continue to be skeptical of institutions that are looking to do partnerships. But Pam, you did some, and I'm going to tell you, I was very hesitant to become an ambassador along with this group. And this is before I met Pam. Now, her colleague Brian is a friend of mine and have practiced the work, and he's out in communities, right? But we knew this wasn't the way that the community ambassador stuff was going to work. This is what we had in our head. It was 8 of us in the beginning. And Pam, there was a couple of things you did that was super important that helped build when people talk about trust. What were some of those practices that you instilled in practice?
Well, first of all, again, going to the table with a lot of humility, because everyone who was at the table was already doing the work. So these are the individuals that we're talking about who are leading in their neighborhoods and who really are the experts. And so of, what is happening and what could be supportive. And so I had to come with the fact that I had no power at the table, even though they would come into our institution and humbly and appreciated that that's where we would meet. But I was not the power. I was not the decision maker. I was there to learn and to listen to them. And there was no agenda. And even in the essence of not having agenda, there was no timeline of how fast we were going to grow together. So I had to give it time. And when Diamond mentions Brian, he's our CEO and president of CICF. And so when we changed our mission, when we were at the end of our strategic plan. So those of you who have strategic plans, you understand how that works or doesn't work, how we create them and then follow them or not. But it was like, we have a strategic plan and it's ending in 2017. There's data that shows that there's a lot happening in our community that is widening the gap. So what do we need to learn more about? So we brought in and paid 36 individuals who represented different geographic areas, different populations, identity, and they went into their neighborhoods or into their populations and they collected data. And through interviews, through observation, they came back. We put that report, in short, was put together, and it's also on our website. But what we learned the most was that we were not close enough to residents. That as funders, this is the way it typically happens, we were getting all of our information from the organizations, from the not-for-profits, from the grantees. We weren't actually hearing from individuals because what we got back was not new data. And that's one of the things that also has to be brought to the table, is not how much data do you have, but how much of an understanding of what is data, what data is really important. And so in those conversations, we were getting the kind of data that we had not gotten before about relationships, about assets, the work that happened with Diamond. So he's actually the leader within this this group, this family now it's become, because it's been now almost 5 years that we have been together. They have come together in a way because of the fact that space was created. So we weren't the power. So let's just say there were many times in the beginning where they would ask me, can we do A, B, and C? We're talking about doing something, and they would turn to me and say, can we do this? And my answer would always be, can you? I'm like, I'm not here to tell you if you can or cannot. And so that created more conversation amongst them. Power started to rise and rise and rise, because it was no longer, I'm at the table, I'm the institution. Again, this is where the resources are. But like, this table is really for real. So like, what are we going to do together? How are we going to grow together? I think that those are the things that created the trust amongst each other, because everybody did not know each other. And, there were times when it was really awkward. But those are our community ambassadors, and that has made a huge difference in how we operate as an institution. They are a part of they're an extension of our staff, because although we pay them, it's a stipend. And we try to make sure it's a fair stipend. But we also make sure that we don't censor their voice. So we have a few, who, if something's going on actually probably all of them really, if something's going on in the city that they want to give voice to, in the way that they do it, in a very real way. And even if it's going to be something that's going to be controversial for us as an institution, we don't censor them. So we've been asked before, like, can't you do something about your ambassadors? It's like, they're not our employees. Like, we don't tell them what to say and what to do. And so with that, it also creates a further essence of making sure that it's clear that power goes both ways. And we're hoping that we are demonstrating that we're demonstrating that, power lives in both spaces. You just have to be willing to share it.
Yep. And one of the things that I laugh at when I say I wasn't going to do it, because I was pushed to the table by a couple of neighbors. And then Pam was like, yeah, well, what do you want to do about it? And I think, as a couple of things, a gift that an institution can have, Pam named it, is power. The other thing it has the power to invest in people's gifts. And what CICF and Indianapolis Foundation really did was to invest in the gift of relationships. And so that power right there was powerful. The other thing it did that a lot of places, when we think about asset framing, is that it is a sin to ask somebody to use their gifts without finding a place for those gifts. And so we have now 9 ambassadors, about to have 11 by the end of the year. And they come from all parts of Black and Brown Indianapolis. We have 2 Latinx, about to be 3 Latinx ambassadors. And these are folks that are down in the nitty gritty. The other thing is, the community ambassadors aren't the community, right? They're listeners and flashlight holders of what's going on, not only with issues, but who is developing good relationships. So I'm thankful for this. Practice is unheard of. Most of us in communities have been traumatized by the practices of basically white supremacy, we would say. Even in Black organizations, it holds up these models where we have and you don't. And instead, in this instance, the gift of recognizing that. The other thing that institutions have, libraries, community foundations, community organizations it has platform. And Indianapolis Foundation has utilized that platform in several, not just with the ambassadors. So the ambassadors are there to lift other people up, not to shine a light on themselves. And we were tasked and are tasked with, how do we put investments, people investments, but also financial capital into those spaces. So those are some of the basic principles. Money must flow in the hands of people. We should share power, right? And sharing power also goes into design. Will allow people to use their voices. So one of the instances early on was around transportation. And we're a lot more refined than we used to be, but we have some firecrackers in the group. And when Pam said, I mean, these are people who are very power living in and have lived and moved up in their power as residents. But there was an instance where Pam was really quiet and there was a conversation around transportation that didn't go well because normally we don't put a lot of time in really listening. And it was a point where a couple of our ambassadors, I remember Beatrice, Valerie and Wild, they held the conversation up and said, hey, we want a chance to really listen to what community can do. And thankfully, that was a space that couldn't have happened if Indianapolis Foundation and CICF wasn't at the table to help convene that. That's what I mean by platform. And a couple of things changed on the east side of Indianapolis. There's a resident council doing something around our whole community, doing around transportation. The other piece is on the west side, near a neighborhood that I live in, is a group of people going to do their own grocery store and a bike shop transportation thing based on this project. So those things open up, and it takes both sides, community, activists, people who work in institutions, people in association life, right, to do a few things. Share stories about potential, right? Find out if there's a problem, who can solve it, right? Who needs to be at a table, not the table. What Pam and others have created around Indianapolis is a new table for new things to happen. And then how are we looking at what impact is what Pam said before. A lot of times data is only controlled by institutions, and residents most of the time have more information than what we need, especially if we're looking to ask different questions. So, we're not asking about people's opinions. We want to ask every individual, where do they actually get off the couch and do something about? And then we put those things into a map, right? And so what the ambassadors have is a list of things and people and that have solutions, and not just the answer to the problem. And that's a struggle sometimes, right, Pam? Getting people to think about in our meetings, when we have our meetings, about potential. People want to go to the problem a lot. And we've been together 5 years, and that's still not out of us yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing I'll add on to that too, Dee, is that as far as the principles and guidelines, is that, we believe people when they tell us that this is what's going on. We don't go in and try to figure out but the data says, or, well, this is what I heard, or this is what I believe, and typically in the essence, again, of just, the very realness of at CICF and at this table that we come to with the ambassadors is very real conversations. And so, our journey over the last 5 years, where it used to be, shocking to hear someone speak of white supremacy culture, but for us, that is what we're talking about a lot of times, is that we've all been programmed to think that there's only certain people that know things. There's only certain people that you can trust and understand, where when you get into these relationships, you come to understand that that is not true. And so when COVID struck us, when the pandemic happened and we needed to move fast, and just like a lot of you probably pivoted, you had one plan, but then you pivoted to other things because of the urgency of what was necessary. From the very beginning, the whole thing was like, these are not new issues. And if we can pivot now and with urgency, then we can keep doing this. This should not be just a moment in time. This should be a way of how we actually change our practices. But the thing about having the ambassadors and already be set in a relationship is we were able to actually pour resources into them, to pour resources into their neighbors. So if a neighbor said, I need medicine, if a neighbor said, I need transportation, I need groceries, they were able to act with urgency. And we weren't sitting back policing. So again, an ambassador said, well, how much can we give in a gift card for groceries? It's like, how much did they ask for? Did you believe them when they asked for that? You are now the decision maker. There's no guidelines around how much of a grocery card. So everybody gets $350 a piece or $50 a piece. It's like, you are now the decision makers. with one other thing I'll add to that though, Dee, around that, because it continued to build itself. So when you talk about rental assistance, a lot of bureaucracy. So coming together with one of our deputy mayors to just talk about the system itself, that was a pretty heated conversation. I thought that's maybe the one you were talking, but it was pretty heated. But that deputy mayor kept coming back to the conversation, where eventually, again, a relationship then became, how can we work together to remove the bureaucracy? The city actually put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the hands or into the Learning Tree, DMI's not-for-profit organization, and they created a process, the ambassadors did, with the help of DMI's leadership, which was a very simple questions in relation to their need, questions having to do with one that's never asked, what brings you joy? So bringing dignity to the process, not just what is your need. And millions of dollars were moved between the influence of the bureaucracy and the actual investment of actual resources. People got their rent paid. So that was another proof positive of, you don't need all the bureaucracy to get people's rent paid. People don't have to be evicted. We have the number 2 eviction rate in the country. Marion County does. And there's a reason for that. There's bureaucracy, and there's also, we don't believe people. So we put them through 1,000,001 things. And by the time they get through all of that, they're already evicted. And now we're working in reaction.
Well,
so they've been huge in that.
And Pam, that happened because of that first part of that experiment. What Pam was talking about previously was called the Neighborhood Relief Fund. And that was where some of the questions got developed about we believe people. The other thing that it was good, because I know it was tense inside CICF to be thinking, now we giving residents money to give other residents. And I remember the tension, but I love that we were invited into part of that conversation to really be thought partners. So leading some of that. One of the other things we did after that, so we did about $1.5 million of relief over a year and a half. And there were 3 basic questions that were tapped into. We got rid of stuff that people couldn't use, but we kept 3 questions, and we kept everything else that needed to be happening, where the bill was being paid, who needed it. But it boiled down to 1 page. And the last 3 questions is, what brings you joy? What are the gifts and talents of people, right, that they have? And then what moves you? And basically those moved people into potential-based things. That's really important and sounds real good, but without the first steps of an institution making good practices, that opens up a platform. Because the deputy mayor wasn't coming to the table just for us at the time. It came because it saw other trusted partners. And now this trust now was shifted, and it was struggle doing that, but it opened other doors. Because of that, one of the ambassadors helped create the tenants assistant program. He actually helped choose the people to be in that project. And it's a pretty good project too. The other thing that happened as a result of that, talking about trust, so $45,000 a year goes into the hands of each ambassador to give out to people. And so they now become community leadership officers, right? And there's no rule except there's not obscene or illegal, right? And people can't do what they do by themselves, and money must touch the hands of people in that neighborhood. And some beautiful things. Our Ambassador Valerie, what she did was there was a young lady that's do a Black Vegan Fest, and she's been doing this out of her pocket all the time. And these are the stories that the ambassadors collect. And so Valerie invested in her, and she brought about 2,000 people together. Not only was there Black folk, there was all the city council that came, and white folk that came to see that there were Black vegan cooks. So that shift, right? There's another instance, I think, at our library in Indianapolis, which downtown library is the best. It utilizes the gifts and talents of people in our community. So one of my neighbors, January York, is going to do a project, a thing around women at the library. So kudos to institutions that look at residents' gifts, but make investments, right? And the other thing that's important, CICF ain't kicking a lot of money in just to the ambassadors, but what they're doing is leveraging relationships, just like the deputy mayor thing. There are other things that happen, but that was just a really good example of, I think, the time there. So I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions, any thoughts, any challenges for us.
There's definitely questions and comments that are coming in through the chat. A lot of people that are very excited by this. One question from Amy is, how long ago did you start the ambassador program?
It's 5 years.
5 years? Okay, that's fantastic. We have another question that is, can you suggest other entry points to this type of work? If you don't have the ear or support of a local funder, and that may be the case for a number of our partners here, where else can we start to demonstrate the potential of transitioning to an asset-based approach? From your stories, it feels like there can be a snowball effect if you have a starting point. Yeah,
well, I always say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that was an important thing that CICF had done. It's used their who can get into the community, first of all. The other thing is, I don't know where you all come from. I know there are some folks from libraries, but you have people that enter your space, and what space could you just change the question? So when people enter in the building and, if you're doing some type of check-in, you maybe ask them, how often you come to a library. Well, ask 3 questions about their gifts, right? Find out who their support systems are, right? So think about questions. And our question around the support system is, what 2 people love you? I know that seems odd, but when everyday residents get asked that question, it does something to their brain chemistry where they shift the conversation, right?
We have a couple of questions, or actually this is something that Rachel, one of our attendees, said: to get my patrons to think about who they serve differently, I give them an outline of a person, county, animal, etc., and have them draw out who they serve. Drawing really works a different part of the brain, and you can learn something new.
That's true.
And Elizabeth is commenting, she said, this is how you make change. How do you get this knowledge out to the community?
I think it's the opposite, is how Pam illustrated earlier. How are you going to listen and find ways to be invited to community? And that is the shift in this work, is that one of the practices we just started was, we used to have meetings at the foundation. And that happened for a lot of reasons. The pandemic slowed us down. And we had early on talked about learning journeys. Pam is always on this constant, we all are on this constant kick around learning. And so we've been out and asking each ambassador to say, what neighbors do we need to know? And so we take twice a month a journey to each of the ambassadors' neighborhoods, and we meet new people.
It sounds like a lot of the libraries that are participating today are very eager to be a part of this. One person is asking, what programming efforts can the libraries, especially our partner libraries that might not be part of this group, the Fin training libraries, what can they take to share this information? What could happen? What are some ideas for programming that you might have?
So a couple of things that most of the libraries know, IMLS, International Libraries, Museum Library Services. Their whole premise now in their work is asset-based community development. And so they did a partnership grant all over the country to support that. I think one of the things you can start with is having conversations in your local places with stakeholders about, and I just wouldn't have like a community conversation around, throw a party and invite people to be part of it. And libraries can do that in their space. That's the gift they have. And just host and start somewhere. I don't think, you know, what we did together was strategic, but it was no magic button to this. And I think long as you have the main thing is that the people who are your patrons and people who use your services have gifts, and find ways to do things that aren't institutional to gather people together. And then, you know, one of the things that Brian Payne would do all the time would come to our parties. And this was several years before he even thought about what they're doing now. And he would come and he would ask hard questions, and we would ask him hard questions back. So I think, who do you know? How do you get them in a room to celebrate one another and to figure out how to discover those things? And we do that with gatherings. We do that. We host parties. Pam invite her social capital. I'll invite my social capital, and ambassadors invite their neighbors, right? And people get to learn each other. And it's not focused around usually time we meet. It is in times of despair, you know. It is about a problem. And so we have to be there. Like, we should figure out ways to be there when there's joy around. Pam, you want to talk a little bit about the Black Joy Festival? I think this is a good illustration.
Sure, absolutely. So what I had written down also that kind of goes in line with this, when you were talking about the 3 questions that were added on, that were asked. Those questions are really important because it allows people, and you pretty much said this, Dee, but I just want to reiterate from an institutional space how important that is when we're doing surveys or asking these questions that we feel like, you know, even as a funder, when it comes to asking questions of organizations, are you getting to the heart of what we really need to know? And when you ask certain questions, you really do you cause people often who are not seen. You're not even seen as you're seen as a problem. You are putting them in a space to look at themselves from a place of, again, asset, but a different description. So I am loved. You know, I do have gifts and talents. One of the things that happened for me personally during the pandemic, especially in the heightened piece of it, was that I had lost the essence of what joy was to me. And in being asked some questions around what types of things are needed in the Black community, my reply at the end of answering all these questions, that yes, there are real challenges, was, can we just center Black joy? Can we just center the fact that there is joy in the community? That as much of the narrative that goes out about the Black community, there's actually joy. And I am having a hard time, even in a space of power, in a space of privilege within this institution, I'm having a hard time finding my joy. So I can't possibly imagine how someone who is in a place where they are really trying to figure it out in a time that has really exacerbated all of the problems that they were already having. So as we're talking about these things, how about we change the narrative about that? Put a narrative around Black joy. And so I shared that with Brian. And in the essence of, I just wanted to have an event that was called that, just Black joy. And that it would center everything that there is around the Black culture. And so, and that would be created by the people who are in the community every day. So we funded it, but we weren't the creators. We have learned and learned and learned that we have to get, sorry you guys. We have learned that we have got to get out of the way. And so what we did was we funded the opportunity, and then I left the table. So there's a continuous pattern and practice, you know, just like I want to make sure that also when Dee said that $45,000 was invested into each of the ambassadors, $45,000 a piece, in case maybe you all got that, but I just wanted to make sure you didn't leave thinking that each ambassador got $45,000. They all got $5,000 with no prescribed way of how they utilized it. The very first time we did it, we had to deal with, like, you cannot cash app everybody because we still have an accounting system, but we worked through it. We still work through it, and we've done it again and again. So With Black Joy, it was an opportunity for me. When it did actually take place at the beginning of August, it had been talked about for a year, and it really felt, it was very, very personal, and it was very moving and very emotional because, again, narratives matter. And so my thing is, the investors outside of us who invested, I was like, if you can invest in, food access, and if you can invest in workforce, and if you can invest in these other things that continuously are talked about in Black community, then you can certainly also invest in our joy. So it's more about investing in who we are as a people. That's what Black Joy was centered around.
How many people showed up, Pam, for that?
About 2,000.
2,000
Wow.
people. 2,000 people. Programs in our city ain't doing that. They not serving, a lot of them's not serving 2,000 people a year. Now, I say that what Pam and I've been talking about sounds really good, but there's hard work in this, and there's a couple of things that were unnamed things that happened, I think, for CICF. And I love the question, that last question asked, but I think two things. Before you even jump into this arena, you need to grieve the things you used to do, right? If we're looking for new ways, we can't go into the new thing. And so CICF moved some things out of the way. There were some things they used to do that they're not doing anymore, because you have to make room. I mean, Pam herself, she's still our leader, but she's the leader of a lot of stuff now, but it made room for Guadalupe, who's excellent in the work, and she has a whole team around her. So the second is cultivate guiding principles that are gift-centered. So once you start to grieve the stuff, for us at my church, it took 2 years to grieve all our nonsense. But in the meantime, we started to celebrate what was going on, and we created guiding principles around that. And it's the same with the ambassadors. The other thing is invest in what's already going on, not just hopes and not just dreams. And so those are some basic things.
I want to thank you both. We're just about at time, but I want to thank you both for sharing this. This is really, it seems to be inspiring everybody that is chatting. We have a lot of people talking about what programs they do at their own libraries, sharing some different resources. Continue to share that, all of you, through the chat related to this. It'll still be there after this session is over. So continue to share that. And continue to think about how to make use of this. Please help me thank Dieman and Pamela for being a part of this and taking time out of their travel to be a part of this particular program. This is fantastic. Thank you all for joining this session.